So the talk that I decided to do this time is called Psychological Safety and Mental Health in Times of Crisis. I did this twice before, and the first time I was sure, I only needed to do this once because COVID would be over soon. But it is as relevant as ever. And actually today is Suicide Prevention Day, World Suicide Prevention Day. So it's about helping people who might be considering suicide to know that there is help for them to get. Because mental health is very important. It's very important when we have normal lives, when we can actually go to work, when we don't have something like this. But it becomes even more important when we are in a situation where we do have the crisis that we do. So I'm an Agile coach. I have my own company called Native Wired, and I work for different companies. So I just finished a gig recently, and I'm in Stockholm at the moment. So I'm an Agile coach, and most of what I focus on is the softer things, so to say. I focus on collaboration among people. I focus on psychological safety. I focus on communication. I focus on feedback. And sometimes I actually also do something agile. And very often, so I'm very keen on retrospectives. So the orange socks that you see here are actually called depression socks. They are from the Danish Association of Depression, which is like association that helps people with depression and also tries to do lobbyism to make sure that we get better care in the Danish health system. And once a year on Depression Awareness Day, people who are like advocates for this will wear orange socks called depression socks. And I myself suffer from depressions. I am on antidepressives, and if I don't take this, I'm alive, but I don't live. That's how I try to explain it. But I'm also very much aware about other health issues. And I think we tend to not have enough focus on mental health in our workplaces. If we ever talk about it, we only talk about mental illnesses, but we forget to talk about mental health. The nice picture of me and Morgan, I have that because Morgan and I worked together and developed trainings in psychological safety. So next week I'm doing 2 workshops with him about psychological safety awareness. It started out as a thing we wanted to introduce, and the more we dive into it, the more interesting we find, and the more we find that this is kind of the basis of what we do. Native Wired is my Twitter ID. I do tweet a lot. Yeah, I'm also a big hugger, even though I do not hug as much at the moment, basically because I don't see people. And my pronouns is she and her. And I'm talking about this because I think this is something we need to talk about. So I have this interest in it. But also I think that we are talking, especially in the beginning, we were talking so much about how do we make this working from home. And we talked about, do we need webcams, which took like 5 months for me to get one. But we also forget about the other things. We talk about, can we actually produce something? But what about stuff like, are we lonely? So I'm going to do a really, really short introduction to psychological safety. So psychological safety is about being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequence, self-image, status, or career. And so this is for Kahn from 1990, and Amy Edmondson, who has a really nice TED talk about this, talks about it. It's about not that you believe you will not be punished or humiliated. And this is very important to us when we have our normal life. If we are working somewhere, it's important that we can go in there, that we can come up with new ideas without being afraid that we can be ridiculed. And the interesting part with punished is that it can be anything from somebody laughing at us to us being fired and kicked out, because it's very much individual. And the thing is that psychological safety is a little bit different now that we are working from home, or at least there are different aspects we need to take care of. So the world we have now is very much characterized by the pandemic. I mean, we have researchers telling us you can do one thing, you can do another, you should take vitamin D. Some people say you shouldn't take vitamin D because you can actually get too much vitamin D because it goes into your liver. So there's a lot of information coming off from researchers, and it just seems like it's pouring into our heads. I mean, most newspapers now will have a live stream about what's going on with COVID during the world. We see all these graphs about how things are going up and down and how they're supposed to be. And the future is very, very unsafe or unsecure. We don't know what's going to happen. I'm glad that Agile on the Beach is hopefully going to happen next year, but right now we don't know. I mean, things move so fast. And at the same time, we have all the other things. We have the movements of Black Lives Matters popping up again, sadly. We have a lot of demonstrations in the US, but other than other places. We have Brexit, which is going to happen soon, with or without the law. I'm not going to comment more on that. We have fires. We have fires in the Amazon. We have fires in the US on the West Coast, which right now in some areas are so bad that there is not proper sunlight. It's just red during the day. So there's all these things going on all over the world, which means that we are in a state of crisis. We are in a state where we are kind of alert because we don't know what is going on. And some of these things affect us directly and some of us don't. I think almost all of us have been affected by COVID. And probably a lot of the people listening to this will be affected by Brexit. But even people like me who still live in the EU will be affected by Brexit. So there's so much going on and we don't know where this is going to lead. We don't know what the world looks like. And this is really stressful for us. And all of a sudden we are involuntarily working at home, which means that all of a sudden we need to do everything in front of a screen, where before we would sit and do some things in front of a screen, and then we would go to a whiteboard, we would do some stuff, we would go to the coffee machine. And part of what this means is we need to figure out how to work together in new ways, which is why I have the jigsaw puzzle. It's kind of like all of a sudden there's all these pieces that need to fit together. You know, how do we do our meetings? How do we do our programming? How do we involve people that would normally just come to us and see something on a screen? And we need to pay extra attention because it turns out that when we cannot see people, which we mostly can't, our brain tries to compensate for that. And one of the ways it compensates is it pays extra attention, which is also why you can be really, really tired after a day. There's also research that shows that even if there's a delay of 7 seconds, you will assume that the other person is not interested in answering. And there's all these things with technique. I heard someone say, it's quite incredible that in the IT world, we still have people struggling with Zoom. But I actually don't think it is. I think we are a few people who used Zoom before and had conversation with people abroad, maybe, or maybe did 1 or 2 things on Zoom or Teams or whatever tool you use. But just because you're in IT doesn't mean you know all the tools that are there. Most people will not have used tools like this. They're used to IDEs for programming, they're used to graphical design, they're used to all kinds of things, but they're not used to online meeting tools. So there's a lot of this, and there's a learning curve going on. And there's also the fact, do we have proper internet, for instance? And some people are alone. So like the first 4 months of the COVID crisis, I was mainly alone. So we started working from home at my client, and they will be working at home until Christmas at least. And since I'm single, I did not see a lot of people. Sometimes I would have up to 20 days where I didn't see anyone. And one of the things Alan and I was talking about before we started this was kind of like, it's kind of like you get stuck. Even though you can go out, you don't do it because you were being a little bit careful. And I ended up at a point where I was actually, sitting at home. I would go out to shop groceries. I would go home. I would work. I would cook. I would clean my clothes, and that's it. the rest of the time I would just sit in my chair, and I would actually get worse and worse. And I kept telling other people and myself that I was okay until I broke. I just had a full Saturday where I just cried. So part of what I did this summer was I went to Denmark and lived 10 weeks with some friends. And 5 weeks of that was just doing nothing, vacationing. So some people are alone and don't have that conversation. And even though you can have some on screen, there is something about meeting people that is different. And it actually also turns out that we also need the small connections that we have. Like if you are taking the train with the same people every morning and recognizing them, or you maybe buy your coffee in the same place, or so all these small encounters, these people that we know but don't really know, actually also matters to our mental health. And then there's the other part, is that some people are not alone ever. There's been a lot of homeschooling going on in various countries, which means that these people, if you're working from home, you are not alone. Maybe you are a couple working from home, which means that all of a sudden you need to have 2 rooms where you can have meetings because you're both working from home. And if you then have to homeschool your kids, sometimes it can be a blessing just to have to go to the bathroom alone. And some people are going like, yeah, but this shouldn't be a problem. You just tell your kids that now you're working. But anyone who's had kids knows that this is just not how it works. Especially if you have young kids, they're not just going to go like, yeah, sure, I'm 4. I'm just going to sit and play in a corner quietly until people are back. So there's lots of this going on, both in our private life, but also in our professional lives. And somehow it's very easy to go into having these days where everything is the same. You have breakfast, you go to your desk, you work, you have lunch, you go to your desk, you work, you have dinner, you watch some Netflix, you sleep, you repeat. And it very easily becomes these things. And I mean, there are jokes going around. Is it actually still March or not? Because sometimes it can feel like that. And I had the experience that I was, so I like to do eggs and bacon every Saturday. And I was like taking out the bacon off the freezer, and I was like, didn't I just do this? And I looked at my calendar and I could see that it was a week ago. And part of that is because our brain doesn't remember everything. Because if we would remember everything, we would go crazy. So basically what our brain does is it remembers the important things, and it likes variations. So when you go out and you see a bus one day and then it's not there the next day, or all these things, you see the sun, you see leaves, you see birds, you see different things. Your brain kind of notices these things without us noticing them. But if it's just the same every day, walking to the same chair from your kitchen where you had your breakfast, our brain kind of filters that out because it's not relevant. It's not important to remember that because it's the same, which means that all of a sudden these things can blur in together. And then we have the kind of like everything is online. We have our parties online, we have our meetings online, we can go to conferences online, we work together online, we relax online, we watch Netflix or whatever. And in some way, this is good. I mean, you don't have to travel. I love being in different places. Traveling is not fun. I love being in different places. So you can attend everything. But the problem with that is that you can attend everything. There's like no boundaries at all. You can just, you can attend a conference. I bet you could attend a conference every single hour of the day someplace in the world. So how do you set these limits? How do you limit yourself? And that can be really, really hard for us. And the thing is, with all these things going on, our mental health suffers. So one of the things you can see is that helplines are getting more and more calls. There is stuff like physical abuse. The calls are getting, I think there was a raise in like 50% in the houses where beaten women can stay, for instance, in Denmark. So there's a lot of things going on, because if you live with an abuser, now you can't go out. And we're starting to slowly go out, but there's still all these things. And even if you are in a healthy relationship and stuff, there's a strain on us because we don't know what's going to happen. So even if you don't have any mental problems already, the fact that you don't see people or you don't have alone time, depending on who you are, and the fact that we don't know what's going to go on, that we're not seeing people. Maybe we focus very much on work, but we don't really get that coffee time that we have with people, where it's actually part of the social stuff. So our mental health is struggling with this. And the other part of it is that our safety is different. I know that a lot of trainers, for instance, recommend when you're doing something, if you're having a meeting, everyone should be on camera. But the problem is that you might not want to show your home for many reasons. It could be that, you don't want to mix your private life with your work life. It could be that you're embarrassed about your home because you can't afford to live in a good place. It could be that you don't have enough bandwidth. I find it a little bit funny that we should have 5G, but I'm kind of like, yeah, maybe we should just get 3G working in all places. So you might not even have the bandwidth. I was seeing some pictures from the US where kids were sitting outside the Taco Bell so they could have internet, so they could actually attend school. And that safety of all of a sudden, people see your home, they see all of you, not just what you choose to show. That creates an unsafety. And a lot of our conversations now is through chatting on Slack or the chat you have in Teams or Zoom or whatever. And that means that a lot of our conversation is gone. Because about 90% of what is communicated is our body language, our facial expressions. And that is not communicated. So when you write something, even if you use smileys, it's very, very easy to be misunderstood. And some people find it very uncomfortable, for instance, to write in a Slack if 40 people can see it. So there's a lot of this going on where people feeling, there's a lot more reason to feel unsafe, and this is some discussions that we need to have. We also have problems with focus. You have to pay proper attention to hear things, especially if you have some people being in a room and some people being remote. But also, some people might not have a good connection. Some people might not have a proper microphone. And we kind of seem to go in this endless loop of trying to pay attention, of trying to, build routines. I don't know how many times I've seen advice about building routines. That part of this working from home, build a routine. And I saw a tweet the other day that said, am I the only one who decided in March that I would build a proper routine and I haven't done it yet? So like keeping ourselves up and running is actually really hard, which also means that sometimes our brain just goes blank because we don't get the input from the outside. Plus, it's really, really hard to focus when you only see this. And there's this whole thing about a lot of people working too much. So I had a conversation the other day with someone who said, but how do I know people work when they're at home? Oh yeah, it was because I was complaining about all the campaigns saying, go back to work. I'm kind of like, no, go back to the workplace or the office because we are working from home. And I know some people where they really struggle with having more micromanagement because their managers don't believe they work so much at home. But research shows that people work a lot more when they're working from home. I actually think I saw Matt being on the call. So I have this tweet from him where he's also like, work is something we can control. There might be all these other things that is with the COVID, and there's the BLM, and there's the Brexit, and the fires, and maybe we'll get fired because some companies are closing. But if there's one thing I can control, it's my work that I do. So first of all, you take your work and you control that because that's what you can do. And people tend to work a lot longer and more focused, which is kind of funny because it's hard to keep focus when they are working from home. Which also means that a lot of people get a little bit stressed. And I'm not talking about stressed as in just a term, but stressed as in a medical thing where your brain is overloaded, your body is overloaded. And together with the fear of losing your job, which many people have, and many people have lost their jobs, a lot of people have this constant fear, which means that basically a lot of our, like I was going to say, non-human parts of the brain, so the early development of our brain is going to take over. That's where the fear is. That's where the panic is. But what is not in those old parts is our logic, because our logic is here. And with all this fear going on, it actually stresses out our brain, and we get a lot of different chemicals in our body that stresses us. And I know there's been a lot recently, or at least the last year, about Maslow being wrong and that he actually only looked at specific kinds of people. But as with all models, they can be useful for some things. And I still think there are some basic needs that we need to fulfill. And the thing with this crisis stuff is that it kind of hits at the lower levels. You know, in the beginning, at least, a lot of places were running out of food or toilet paper. So you kind of like, you need to eat, you need to sleep, you need to have these things. And that's kind of the physical things. You need to have these to survive. But we also need safety. We need the safety of knowing we have our house or a place to live. And what we're seeing now, for instance, is that people are starting to get evicted. Even though there were laws made in the beginning so people couldn't get evicted, those laws are now running out, and people are losing their homes, they're losing their jobs, they're losing all kinds of safety. And then we're not even talking about, you know, the belonging part, that you actually belong, for instance, at work, and that you belong with the teams that you are hanging out with. So there's a lot of this going on that's really going into the total basic needs that we have. And of course, this doesn't mean that there's no good stuff. For instance, we can actually work from home. I mean, imagine if this happened 10 years ago, it would be horrible. Plus, a lot of people who wanted to work from home now have the option to work from home, and they have more family time. And of course, for some people, this is really tough. But for a lot of people I know, they actually enjoy, for instance, they can have lunch with their kids. So there are good things about this. We don't have to commute, we don't have to sit on trains. And we do have the world kind of at our disposal. One of the things we have seen in Denmark is that prematurely born babies are down 90%. And when I talk about prematurely born babies, I'm talking about the really, really tiny ones that have to go into the hospital. That is down 90% since the middle of March. So maybe we are also taking some of the time we have to rest. And then there's stuff like the SGN was some good news. That was, I think it was 8 episodes of good news, just presenting good news. What is happening of good things in the world? The thing on this in my right are actors reenacting The Princess Bride, but not being together. So playing different roles and then kind of talking to each other. So it just looks like the camera angle is switching. And there's a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of creativity of things we can get, which of course we need to be careful, because we can also be really tired of just sitting in front of a screen. So the question is, what can we do about this? So of course, the first thing we can do is we can enjoy the things that are good. We can enjoy the fact that we can spend time with people, that we don't have to sit on trains, that we can actually go to conferences, maybe in countries where you had never afford to travel. But another part that is really, really important is to be kind. And not just be kind to other people, but also be kind to yourself. So if you talk about yourself, what can you do for yourself? So one of the things you can do is eat healthy, which really, really, at least for me, takes a lot of kicking myself in the butt, because it's so easy to just fall into the trap of eating tons of candy and chips, or crisp, as you would say in England, or puddings, which are not puddings except when it is. Yeah. but eat healthy food. It doesn't mean that you can never eat non-healthy food, but maybe now that you have time at home, maybe make an effort to actually make healthy food, because your body feels better when it has healthy food. And when your body feels better, your brain also feels better. And then there's the part about taking enough breaks. Very often when you're sitting in a workplace, what you see is that if one person leaves to go to the coffee machine, other people leave as well. So we tend to take a few more breaks when we're at a workplace. And it's very easy to just become focused and just sitting and staring in that screen. So take enough breaks. And if you can, step away from the computer so that you actually don't just sit and stare into a screen. One of the things I picked up, for instance, is crossword, like good old-fashioned paper crosswords, because that takes me away from the screen. Plus, it's fun to do. And remember to move from time to time. I actually have, my best friend's girl is 19, and one of the guys from her school actually had a blood clot in his leg because he was sitting in his room for 3 days playing computer games, and his mom came in with a tray with food. So all he did was move from his bed to the computer to the bathroom and back. And after 3 days, that was enough for him to get a blood clot. And like we all know that if we're sitting on a plane, we have to move a bit, even though I guess a lot of us won't do it, even though we know it. A lot of this is like the logic, we just have to do it. But can be really difficult. But move from time to time. The best thing is if you can get some fresh air, take a walk or something, but any kind of movement is good. Like physiotherapists say, the best position to work in is the next one. Because it's not about finding a good sitting position or finding a good standing position. It's about actually moving around. And watch your sleep habits. It's very easy for either fall into not getting enough sleep or getting way too much sleep, because you don't have to get up this early. So be aware of your sleep habits, and maybe now you can actually get the sleep that you needed. But if it becomes too much, be aware of it, and also be aware of it if it's becoming a lot less. And a suggestion, limit intake of news. I mean, most of the news that we see are just terrible, because that's what makes good news. Nobody wants to, well, we do see a little bit of news like, oh, a 106-year-old now cured for COVID and stuff like that. But most of what we see is just bad stuff. So limit that. Maybe only look at it once a day, or just not look at it at all. That's also okay, as long as you keep up with what the authorities tell you you have to do in your country. And remember to be kind to yourself. It's sometimes hard to be kind on ourselves. And when it comes to, for instance, mental health, saying to people, you know what, I don't feel comfortable putting on my video today. That is okay. Or if you have a weekend where you do nothing because you need the rest, be kind to yourself, don't judge yourself, and try to learn to listen to these things. Because it's not about being lazy, it's about taking care of yourself. It's about listening to what your body needs. And then sometimes, yes, you kick it so that it actually moves a bit or it eats healthy. And you could build a good routine. I will someday. It's on my to-do list. And part of what you can do for others is create new working agreements. Because we are in a new environment. All of a sudden, everyone is staring into a computer. Or now that people are starting to get back to work in different countries, you still have some people working from home. So most of what we do will still be half remote. So talk about this. What are the working agreements? What are the things that we need to be very explicit about? So for instance, one of the things one of the teams I worked with did was they would say good morning when they would, in the Slack, when they would be there, they would say, oh, I'm just going for coffee. So kind of like almost over information, because you can't tell. Whereas if you're in a room, you say, oh yeah, John is not there, I'm not going to talk to him right now. But having that over information, and that was one of the agreements they did. Another team I worked with agreed that everyone would put their video on in the morning when they had their daily, and they would then say, you know, good morning and stuff like that. And then if you wanted to, you could turn your video off for the rest of the day. but create these new working agreements. And also when we get back to work, maybe look at what were the things that worked for us, because there are things that worked for us. Some people really, really struggle, for instance, being around a lot of people, which means that if you need to commute via train or tube or bus or whatever, there will be a lot of people around you. So maybe it's better for them to work home a few days a week. So try making these new working agreements. Oh yeah, especially around communication. Because so much of our communication is filtered away, remember to now make working agreements about the communication. And talk about it. I think it's very important that we talk about this. Not that we should like have an endless discussion about, what's going on in Portland, or, what's going on with Brexit, and read all the news. What's going on with COVID? How many dead do we have? How many do we have who are cured? Is there a new vaccine? It's not like that. But do talk about these things and be empathic. Listen to people. Know that other people are struggling, or maybe that they're not. I know some people who almost feel guilty that they feel happy working from home because they can really focus, they can be with their families, but they almost feel guilty because they can see that other people are struggling. But that also means that they may have the extra energy to be empathic and listen to people. But even if you don't, try to do your best. And of course, be kind. Because being kind is one of the best ways we can have good working environments. And it's also one of the best ways of building, starting to build a psychologically safe environment, building that trust, building a fact that we can actually speak up. And if somebody, has a bad day and says something horrible, try to meet that with kindness, because they're probably not doing it because they're a horrible person. I would very much doubt that. They're doing it because they don't have the headspace and the energy to not. And make it okay to be in a bad place. Make it okay to say, you know what, today I'm in a bad place, so I might be a bit grumpy. But also remember that you are still responsible for your actions. Which means that if you are grumpy one day and you told people and you yell at someone so they cry, for instance, you are still responsible for that. Which means that then you go the next day and you say, or if you can do it the same day, but you might not have the energy for that, but then at least the next day go and say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it. Take responsibility for your actions. I think I forgot to say that you will get these slides later. I will send them to Alan. I just remembered it because this one is very small. But this is a tweet from the Canadian government, which I think was a really good example, because it's telling people, you are not working from home. You are working during a crisis. So companies can go in and say, we know that this is difficult for you. We know that you might need help. One of the things that I see, I just worked with the Swedish television, was that they make sure to have coffee, like department coffees, every 3 weeks, and try to make it a little bit fun. And that might look like, okay, why are we doing? But it's about, making that interest, showing people that they care about them. They are very much looking into how are people feeling, sending out a survey. They make people aware that there's actually a service where you can get help. And a lot of companies have this. They have like an emergency, like a mental first aid person, or they might even have a psychologist you can talk to. A lot of companies have this, but I think this is a really good example of how a workplace can be.